just landed a new head of finance role, finance director, CFO role, you might already know that the first 90 days are quite full on. You potentially have been dropped into really messy numbers, unclear ownership, and zero time to figure things out. So today I wanted to go through those first 90 days so that you don't just survive, but you lead. My name's Alysha Randall. I'm a fractional CFO, and I also run Financial Leadership Fundamentals course that helps new finance leaders within startups and scale-ups. So today I wanted to go through a book that I always recommend. Now, apart from my book that I always recommend to everyone to read, particularly if you are new to finance leadership in a startup or scale-up, the second book I always recommend, and you can see because I've got both ready to go, is this one. It is The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins. So I was actually recommended this 10 years ago, I think, no, longer, by my last essential CFO, really. The last time I worked underneath a CFO, he recommended this book, and it was probably the first book that I read on leadership. And even though the book is very much written for, I would say, for large corporates, listed companies, really large corporate businesses, there is so much in this book that is useful for a startup environment. So you do have to adapt it a little bit, which is why this one's also useful. But it's quite good for, particularly if you haven't really done a leadership role before. So this is also relevant if you've been promoted. So say you've been a financial controller, you've just been promoted to a head of finance. A lot of what you need to do can be applied here and here. So I want to focus on this one. So I think this is a brilliant book, and so I would highly recommend that you take a look at it. But I do want to talk about my kind of view on this and why I think it's worthwhile reading. So as you probably know, if you work within a startup, they do move really fast. And so if you don't really get to grips on the role early, you potentially may be stuck in that firefighting mode and just reacting to problems rather than really leading proactively. I know I certainly made that mistake, and I've written about it a lot, but it is something that you can get really stuck in, feel like you're on a hamster wheel quite easily, particularly in startups. I mean, I think even in large corporations, you can also get into that mode, but you're not behaving like a leader. So what Michael Watkins really talks about is about reaching your break-even point. So the point, what that means is the point at where you start adding more value than you're consuming, which is a really interesting concept, particularly because you're not in a sales role, you're not in a commercial role, even though ideally you should be really helping with sales and commercial. But it's a really interesting way of having a metric as to what is the point they need to get to. And he obviously wants you to get to that point at the end of the 90 days. I would say 90 days is really interesting as well, particularly in the UK, because a lot of time your probationary period is 90 days. So to be able to get to that break-even point by the end of your probationary period is also a good goal to have. I would say in a finance leadership role, particularly if you're the only senior finance person in the business, you do actually want to hit this point quite quickly. So even if you're not a CFO and just a head of finance or a finance director, it's still really important to take a look at this and think about at what point do you break even. So you really, ideally, you don't kind of want to be 6 months into your role and still really been buried with legacy issues and no real wins to show for it. So the things that it really talks about is your goal in the first 90 days is to build credibility. So that's about the way that getting that kind of establishing trust with the founder and the team, particularly the leadership team, and the team that works with you. And that does take time. But if probably the first month you can be a total don't know where your head's at. But as far as like information is concerned, but in here, it gives you good structures and steps to implement immediately that you can do. Both of these books do. So there's kind of actions of what you can do in your first week, even when you don't know much about the culture and the company. I mean, ideally, as a finance leader, you should be doing a fair bit of research before you start, but this is a really good approach on how you can do that. You also want to identify where you can add value quickly. So there is always low-hanging fruit, and it's trying to work out where that low-hanging fruit is. You want to set the tone of how finance operates under your leadership. So this is probably non-negotiable. So in a startup, the quick wins are everything. So you don't really want to wait until month 3 to start showing some impact. So what counts as a quick win? So it might be, say, upgrading your management accounts so they're readable. We go through that in this one. It might be doing some cash forecasting for the next 13 weeks to 52 weeks. It might be fixing some messy bookkeeping handovers from outsourced providers so that the people start trusting the numbers. So you're just fixing those quickly. It might be helping the founder understand the cash burn and cash runway in plain English. They may not understand it properly, understand it from a high level, but not properly. So it's worthwhile understanding that. And it's also important about not being too flashy. So you want to really fix the pain points that makes people's lives easier, especially if you're the first leader within the business. What's really interesting is when you're being interviewed, you may even glean from the founder the pain points that they had, the things that they really want you to fix. So there's some really good information. It's worthwhile making note of that so that if you do get the role and if you do start with their company, what are the things that the founder really wants help with? So you'll gain trust faster if you do things like that rather than rocking up with a 30-tab model that no one really asked for. So finance does sit across the entire business, but in most startups, no one outside finance sometimes can understand what you do. So basically, it's on you to make those connections. So if people just think finance just pay the bills and do the payroll, you've got a bit of work there. So in those first few weeks, you do want to schedule calls or coffee chats with the CEO and founders, your head of sales, your head of operations, product, those, developing those business relationships early on. Both of these books tackle that. You also want to think about key external contacts, so accountants, bookkeepers, investors, those kind of thing. Anyone managing spend or revenue inputs. You want to ask a lot of questions in these meetings, especially the first one. So you're there to listen. You're not there to sell yourself. You're there to really get a feel of how the business works, not just what's on the org chart. You want to find out what are their goals, what are they working towards, what their pain points are. And if you're speaking to the CEO, your direct report, you also want to find out from them how they like to be updated. So do they like email? Do they like Slack? Do they like voice notes? Do they need face-to-face meetings? It's good to be, if you're early stage at a brand new role, it's really good to have those conversations early on because you can ask that question. If you've been there for a while and you don't quite know, you might have to ask someone else or do a bit of hit and miss. You're also worthwhile asking the CEO or founder how involved they want to be in the numbers, perhaps what they're really worried about this quarter. And ideally, your job is to make their life easier and you want to build trust from day one. One of the most common mistakes I see in finance leaders is getting too caught up in the detail without thinking about the big picture. So I would say don't start rebuilding the budget before you know what that long-term vision is, what the real goals are for this quarter, what the board cares about, how aggressive or conservative the commercial strategy is. And you do want to find out from the founder what does success look like in 12 months? Where do we need to invest? What's the biggest financial risks right now? And then, and only then, you can really start shaping the roadmap for finance. So every task you prioritize, from process cleanup to reporting improvements, should map back to that vision. So this is how I break it down, and also how this breaks it down. So month one is really about discovery and quick wins. So fix the obvious problems, meet with every key stakeholder, understand the commercial model, and learn how the founder thinks. Month two is then to build the foundation. So you want to start upgrading systems, reporting, processes. You really want to align with the CEO goals and expectations. You want to begin shaping your longer term financial plan, or finance plan rather. And you do want to introduce a light structure. So by that I mean weekly reports, simple dashboards, cash routines, those kind of things. By month three, that's when you're adding value and breaking even and really influencing. So you want to lead the conversation around financial strategy rather than relying on the founder anymore. You want to spot gaps. So is the business ready to fundraise or hire or scale, whatever the goals are? Is the business ready for those bigger goals? And potentially you also may need to start educating others in the business on how finance can help them, particularly again, if you're the first finance leader that's been hired. They haven't had you around before. So again, don't wait around for them to ask for something. You need to be proactive here. And presenting a clear plan for the next 6 to 12 months. So this is what real leadership looks like. It's not just, surviving your first quarter and passing your probation. You actually want to shape that function and really position yourself as a strategic leader. So a few things to keep in mind: don't try to do everything. So prioritize high impact tasks. You don't want to go quiet for weeks on end. You want to over communicate quite early. You want to start kickstarting those relationships very quickly. You also don't want to assume people understand what finance does, so just educate them gently. This is a perfect opportunity to say, I don't know, but I'll find out, which is totally fine. You really don't need to have all the answers in the startup, and you don't necessarily need to be in the first 90 days here. That is for, I still don't know everything. And so when I start work, I've been doing this, working with startups for 20 years. I still don't know everything. So there is nothing wrong with saying I don't know, but make sure you show initiative, take ownership, always come back and build momentum. So the first 90 days in a new finance leadership role can really feel overwhelming, but there's also massive opportunity. So if you want to become a capable, confident finance leader in a startup, is what I recommend. 3 steps. The first one is to subscribe to this channel. I share new content every single week, so to really help you level up. The second one is to read 2 books now for this one. These are the 2 books that I would strongly recommend. Both of them are full of actions that you can implement today. I certainly was heavily influenced by this. And as I said, it's focusing on C-suite, not necessarily finance, and it's also probably more large corporations. This is where this bridges that gap. So this is very finance focused, and it's very startup and scale up focused. So with those 2 together, you would get a huge amount of information on how to be a strong leader. And then the third one is to join the FLF program, where we have monthly Q&A and we support each other in the growth from manager to leader, where students ask me questions and there's a full comprehensive program that they work through. So that's the 3 steps. Lovely to see you here this week, and I'll see you next week. Cheers.